Yes, so we're now live. Good afternoon, welcome. My name is Kalina Roshakov. I'm an energy and climate reporter, and I'll be moderating the panel today. As you know, we're here at the CVF Virtual Summit, and here to talk about stepping up climate ambition to meet the 1.5 degree warming limit. I'm very happy to be here. I think it's a great time. We're just over a week before global negotiators are meeting in Katowice in Poland for the COP24 climate summit to discuss and ideally agree the rules to implement the Paris Agreement. But aside from the technical rulebook, it's also going to be a crucial moment to see whether governments are willing and ready to increase their climate efforts. And I think especially now that the UN IPCC has come out with its landmark 1.5 degree report, it is clear to everyone that it's urgent. Time is running out if we're indeed going to meet the target. However, the report also showed that it's possible to do so, something that some governments are always a bit wary about. And so with this, I would first like to introduce all the panelists. We have Jennifer Morgan, the Executive Director at Greenpeace. We have Helen Montfort, Director at the New Climate Economy. We have Marcel Boykeboom, the Climate Ambassador for the Netherlands. Mayor Mohamed Sowal, the Mayor of Accra, and the chair of C40 Group. And we have Professor Daniela Jacob, who was one of the lead authors in the 1.5 degrees report, and Andrea Meza Murillo, the Deputy Chief Negotiator of Costa Rica. And first question to you, Daniela. So why does the 1.5 degree goal matter so much? What does the science tell us? If you could lay out the issue that we're discussing today.
Yeah, thank you very much. The most important message from the report is that there are no obstacles to not limit global warming to 1.5 degree besides the political will. There are no physical, chemical, technological, financial, or other constraints. It is doable to limit 1.5 and it is necessary. So the report builds on 6,000 studies with about 200 authors, 4 rounds of reviews, and it is very solid. And for the first time, we got an idea about what 1.5 degree, how much it differs from today's climate and how much it would differ from a 2 degree climate. We have already seen, since pre-industrial time periods, an approximate of 1 degree warming until now. And with this, we also saw that the extremes weather situations like heat waves, like droughts, like heavy precipitation have already changed. And this has changed in a period where 0.5 degree warming happened. So another 0.5 degree warming is very likely to change again extreme events like the tropical storms, like the amount of water which falls within a tropical storm, like the drought, the extension, the intensity of droughts, and heat waves, of course. This all is impacting natural and human systems. We also know that the current emissions which are in the atmosphere are not sufficient to bring us to a 1.5 degree warming. On the other side, this means whatever we emit in the upcoming years will make the difference. And why is it so important? It is so important that we can reduce the risk. For example, we will have less extreme weather events when we limit 1.5 compared to 2 degree warming. We have 10 centimeter less sea level rise. And you think this is not much, but it is much because more than 10 million people along the coastlines are less at risk if we limit to 1.5 instead of 2 degrees. And in addition, the water is intruding into the inland, into the agricultural areas, so there are more also agricultural products affected. We can also reduce the global population which is exposed to water shortage by 50% if we limit the warming to 1.5 instead of 2. Warm coral reefs, warm corals might be able to survive under 1.5 degree warming. They will not be able to survive under 2 degree warming. And if you remember that these are at the beginning of the feeding the little fish and at the beginning of the chain from the coral reef to the fishery, then of course all the way the fishing communities will be affected by changes already in the coral reefs. So we can affect the livelihoods of communities, and we can be able to have lower risk for them if we are under 1.5 degree compared to 2. So all of this is very important, and it is doable. That's what the report says. We have to reduce emissions by 45% until 2050, which is very ambitious. But together with a governance and a joint activity from local people, communities, subnational, national communities, indigenous peoples, and an international cooperation, we can be able to reach this and to limit the risk to society, to humans, and to ecosystems. So bottom line is, every half degree matters. We are already living in a changed climate. Every year which we are wasting to act has an important impact, so we have to act soon. And every choice which we take is important. I haven't said much about cities, but of course, there's so many cities along the coast, and cities are they are very important for the development. The report clearly states that the cities as cross-sectoral areas have a potential to act as innovating and transformation motors, but they are also very vulnerable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to that. And for that, turning next to Andrea. So you're about to go to negotiate on behalf of your government, but do tell us, what does this 1.5 degree goal mean for you, and what does the report matter? What's its message for a government like yours?
Yes, thank you, and good evening or good morning to everyone. For us, what we see is this clear message: this transition is possible, and we're really taking this into consideration. We want to do some science-based policies. We have now a new government, a new president, who is saying, what is the legacy that we want to give to the next generations? Because in our country, in my country, what we have done in the past have been very important decisions that made a difference in our development model. We abolished the army, and that really had a big impact in the past. We direct those funds for development, education, social benefits, but we also made some environmental important decisions in the past, and we now are seeing the benefits. Of course, you have heard our history around the tax on fossil fuels that we made 20 years ago, and we were directing those funds to the Forest Fund for doing the payment of environmental services scheme. And I think that it is very interesting to hear some data around the impacts that we're having with that decision that we made 20 years ago. And that was very innovative in that moment. For example, we are placing more than 1 million hectares under this scheme. Remember that we are a very small country, so those probably in other scales that doesn't sound big, but for our scale, that's a huge amount of land and area under that scheme. And we are now having, of those areas, 89% is under protection. But the interesting thing right now that I want to highlight is that we have been invested in more than 6 million trees, but benefiting more than 50,000 rural families with that. And listen to this, we have been channeling public funds from this tax. And the investment of more than $400 million, $100 million to rural areas, and $60 million for indigenous territories. And this is just to say that right now our president is saying decarbonization is now the big legacy that we want to give for the future generations. And we say science is there. We have no technical constraints. That's what we're hearing right now. And we are here and to see that the political will is there. And it is not easy. Of course, there's a lot of discussions here. Are we ready for moving into electrification of transport? Are we ready? We are a developing country, and we are taking big steps right now, generating new legislation for the incentives of this new technology, and having big discussions of what are the next steps. We have more than 100 renewable energy on the electricity sector. So these have been very interesting too, and this is done because of the decisions that we made in the past. So what we're seeing is we have to be very careful of the kind of investments that we want to do now, because 2050 is almost there. So that's why we are creating our decarbonization plan for 2050. And it's basically having a clear idea of which are the pathways for doing this decarbonization in the other areas. We strongly want to see concrete outcomes, of course, from this negotiation. We are very committed. We want to see the Tylenol dialogue as a very central, momentum and outcome of this COP, because we want to see these long-term strategies there from other countries, from the different countries. We see that this challenge is big, but it is with this inclusive multilateralism that we are going to face this challenge together and do this transition together, considering our own conditions, and having a clear idea that this will impact and have benefits in our communities. And I think that at the end, this is how our ministers and how our president is seeing this, that it will have the impacts, and this will be the legacy of this new development model for the new generations.
Thank you very much for this. Jennifer, turning to you, I mean, we already hear now examples of what the Costa Rican government is doing. However, I mean, where do you see examples like this shine a light on what other governments could do, and what do you generally see as the role of governments now going into the climate talks?
Thanks. Well, first of all, I just want to say how great it is to be here on a virtual summit. This is the kind of innovative thinking that we need, and a real hats off to the Marshall Islands for moving us in this direction. I think we've heard a lot about what's needed, how half a degree matters so much. I think that was perhaps a surprising outcome for many people, where in Paris, people were thinking about 2 degrees, and 1.5 was a target that was there for the small island nations. And I think what this IPCC report makes clear is that 1.5 is for every country. It's really a global imperative and not an aspirational goal. I think it's, where we go from here. Well, the report really outlines what I would say is like a rescue plan, and lays out very clearly the need to have global emissions by 2030, which sounds dramatic, but as we heard, it is possible if we decide to do it all together, and we need that kind of all hands on deck approach. And I think it's also time for people and decision makers to understand that only an incremental approach actually isn't going to get us there, and we just can't fool ourselves anymore. We don't have time for only incremental. So we need to be thinking bold and thinking big, and we just can't sleepwalk through chaos. So, I think in the IPCC, the plan is quite clear, and this is where governments and banks and corporations come in. We need to phase out fossil fuels very rapidly, and coal consumption has to be reduced by 2/3, oil use halved, and gas reduced by more than 1/3 in the decade between 2020 and 2030. And I like to think about, pumping money into coal and oil. It's almost as if, we've been diagnosed with lung cancer, and then we continue to smoke despite this terrible diagnosis. It's just unreasonable, and it's dangerous. And the good news there is that there are a number of insurance companies, in banks who are actually divesting from coal, and we need to see more of that happen. I think the report was also, and this is where we need even more action, is a focus on forests, right? Forest protection and restoration, together with other natural climate solutions, can provide over a third of climate mitigation between now and 2030. And so the forests are really our only natural and tested, quote, technology to lessen the impacts and will bring many benefits. So it's a huge challenge. I think the key thing we're lacking, and we started with this, is political will. And it's really great to hear the actions that Costa Rica are taking, and certainly there is leadership happening in various places. I would put Costa Rica in that list. Obviously, the Marshall Islands, New Zealand's ban on new offshore oil and gas exploration. Korea, if you look at the largest coal province, Chungcheongnam-do, just committed recently to phase out coal, a major issue. And today, actually, we heard from Vanuatu's Minister of Foreign Affairs, who announced that Vanuatu is, quote, today putting the fossil fuel industry and the states that sponsor it on notice that the climate loss and damages ravaging Vanuatu will not go unchallenged. And he announced that they're going to be exploring all avenues to utilize the judicial system. I think two last points from my side. We need more of this kind of leadership that we are seeing. There is a transformation ongoing, and I think there's no place more important right now than Germany and what Chancellor Merkel decides to do in her role. There is a coal commission underway right now to discuss by when Germany should phase out coal. The IPC is quite clear. I mean, on that, OECD countries need to move fast. 2030 is the key date. And I think if Germany doesn't make this happen by 2030, it's very difficult for others to follow. And the Chancellor has a key role there. And I think can bring a conclusion into COP24, where we really need to see that very clear signal that the political response to this scientific response is a commitment to do more, and that the 2020 timeframe, that there'll be a process to get that commitments in from all countries, that by 2020 they will raise their 2030 ambition. And I think we're really very much, it's great to have Marcel on the call, looking towards the European Union in providing leadership there. Finally, I just want to say, people power is renewable. It's growing. People know that something is wrong. They know that governments and corporates have failed them. They're ready to engage, whether it be in Germany in the Hambach forest, where we saw tens of thousands of people there, whether we see the many court cases underway on climate litigation. People are working together. And I think they understand that we are at a unique moment in history where this choice is crystal clear. Are we going to move swiftly to this zero carbon economy that brings multiple benefits, or spiral into disaster? And I think leaders are going to be judged on the choices they make, and we all need to work to be on the right side of history on this one. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much, Jennifer, for raising the issue of political will and political commitments and sticking with commitments. Especially Germany is a bit of a challenging case in that respect, since it's going to miss pretty much all of its energy and climate targets, which is raising a lot of domestic as well as European-wide questions. And with that, I would like to turn to Marcel. As we already heard, the focus is on the EU to lead, to show leadership. Will the EU show leadership? And can the EU show leadership, given its difficult 28 member bloc that it is?
Thank you, Kalina. I have to say I'm not German and I'm not a politician, but you are right. I'm from the Netherlands and from Europe, and I would like to say something about the leadership that we try to take, and perhaps also something that I think is important to know in the run-up to Katowice, because that is going to be an important COP. But maybe first of all, thanks and compliments to President Heine from the Marshall Islands for this wonderful initiative. I always feel guilty traveling and polluting the world for the good cause. And although I do compensate my emissions through an offset scheme, And people do tell me if anyone should be allowed to fly, it's a climate envoy. A virtual summit feels much better. It's not only environmentally friendly and time efficient, it also brings the transparency that is so necessary during this difficult transition. And anyone with connection to the World Wide Web can now participate, and this really lowers the threshold. This immediately brings me to the subject of language. And as a diplomat, I'm aware of the importance of language. It sometimes feels like it's our main job to discuss words between brackets. Should it be shall or rather should? Language is a broader subject than the text we negotiate, though. It is a signal that has been sent from Paris to the world in 2015. It's the images that we repeatedly see from Malibu to Manila and from Mali to Majuro. Language that has been picked up by citizens in the meantime, by scientists, media, mayors, and entrepreneurs across the globe. People that are now talking back. And when we listen carefully, we hear one key message: hurry up. And I think Jennifer said it in her own words as well. And this message is being picked up in the Netherlands as well. The Dutch government has given the Paris Agreement a place at the core of its coalition agreement, an ambitious agreement that aims for a sustainable Dutch economy and society. And concrete measures include, and I think that is what you have been referring to as well, we will close all coal-fired power plants before 2030. And a national climate agreement that will lead to halving emissions by 2030 and a carbon neutrality by mid-century. We will have an introduction of a carbon floor price for the electricity sector and hopefully for the wider economy later on. There will be an aviation tax, and there will be a climate act with an ambitious long-term goal, also the climate neutrality halfway century. So those are the kind of ambitions that we have nationally and that we also take to international negotiations. And because all these measures, I think, have a direct link to the Paris Agreement. And when we in the Netherlands sign a multilateral agreement, we immediately get to work, because we strongly believe in multilateral solutions for global problems. But for multilateralism to work, you cannot treat its outcomes as non-committal. But there's more to it for my country. If it wasn't for Dutch water management expertise, developed over centuries, and a society-wide consensus to invest in adaptive measures, I would have given this introduction underwater, as I'm sitting several meters below sea level. The Netherlands is a very vulnerable country, as you know, one of the reasons why my Prime Minister addressed this forum earlier today. And one of the reasons why we are active members of the High Ambition Coalition, also led by the Marshall Islands. Rising sea levels, melting ice caps, sinking polders. Living in a delta like the Netherlands means that threats are coming from all directions. We know mitigation is the best form of adaptation, but we also feel the need to adapt. We do believe our knowledge and expertise in this field can benefit others as well. And for that reason, we are now hosting the Global Center on Adaptation. And we also help convene the Global Commission on Adaptation, co-chaired by Ban Ki-moon, Kristalina Georgieva, and Bill Gates. When it comes to the implementation of the Paris Agreement, though, we have to look at its three pillars. Apart from the examples on mitigation and adaptation I just mentioned, we also try to live up to the objectives on climate finance. Just this week, a tender was launched for a new fund on climate and development, filled with 160 million euro, open for businesses ready to invest in climate projects in developing countries. We also actively cooperate with the Dutch financial sector to make all financial flows consistent with the Paris goals. And one example in this field brings me back to the subject I started with, language. Financials speak a different kind of language, and translation of our governmental speak into operational financial talk proved to be a challenge. But we are getting there as well. The work of the platform Carbon Accounting Financials can be seen as a good example of such an effort. And their work can be an inspiration for banks, investors, and other financial institutions in other countries, I think. Finally, Kalina, I want to underscore the importance of young people. When I talk about language, I talk about effective communication. And one very important aspect of communication is listening. And when I talk with young people, I realize that they also have their own language. That language is often a reflection of deeper belief systems, different values, and alternative perspectives. It might provide us with the help we need as we, quote Albert Einstein, cannot solve our problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them.
So thank you very much for leaving us with that. I think we should come back to that thought later because I think the whole discussion about 1.5 degrees is very much about changing the way we've done things until now. And the question is whether that change can occur fast enough to actually mitigate the crisis that we're facing. But with that, you've also raised 2 points that I think are very useful in this discussion, that is vulnerability and adaptation. And I would like now to turn to the mayor of Accra to see how do cities face climate change effects today. I mean, as a city, what do you have to do, and what is your view on this discussion from a city point of view? I think we will have to switch on the mic.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure having me, and I'm happy that I'm representing Accra as the mayor and also as a vice chair for C40, representing African cities who are committed to address issues of climate change. As part of Accra and C40's diplomacy efforts, I'm delighted to serve as a C40 adaptation champion in climate change issues. To bring you up to speed, somewhere last year, Accra hosted the African Adaptation Forum, and with multiple stakeholders, including cities, and the outcome of the Adaptation Forum was shared at the World Urban Forum in Kuala Lumpur, February last year, where climate adaptation was addressed extensively. There's a strong willingness from cities to work in better coordination with national governments. And in Ghana, to be specific, we have 31 actions that are targeted at bringing the country into compliance with the Paris commitment. And this covers both mitigation and adaptation action. There are 20 mitigation actions and 11 adaptation actions. These are actions which are all designed to ensure economic development, follow a low carbon economy path in 7 priority areas in our country. However, to talk about Accra's specific commitment, which is the city, we are committed and part of the C40 to develop and implement a deadline 2020 climate action plan that meets the Paris Agreement standards. Accra is also part of the 100 resilient cities to ensure the city builds systems that internalize the pillars of climate resilience. We are also part of the Urban Health Initiative with the WHO program on the Breathe Life Accra, and this is to address the growing challenge of air pollution and its impact on public health. We are also part of the Bloomberg Initiative of Global Road Safety. It is to ensure an understanding and address the causes of road crashes and to have fatalities and injuries of road users. And these are all specific commitments that Accra has made towards all these programs in the area of to address the issues of climate change and to contribute its quota to the national NDC and to respond to the concerns of the most vulnerable city like Accra. Specific issues or initiatives that Accra has also done following from these global alliances that we have is in the area of transportation. I mean, transportation, it's Accra transportation system, it's one key area that we need to work on to curtail emissions, because our public transport systems is not the best. And I've been the chairman of the urban planning and mobility issues. We are focusing on the bus rapid transport system to reduce the number of vehicles in the system, because almost all the vehicles that comes in the system are old use imported from Europe and America, and they are not climate compliant. Another specific initiative also that we have is on waste management. It's a big challenge that we have in Accra. It will interest you to note that the president even of the country has declared that by 2020 he wants Accra to become the cleanest city in the whole of Africa. It is not only to address issues of sanitation or public health. It's also to enhance our dignity as human beings, and also to reduce the emissions that comes from the wastes and that impacts on the climate change. Because our energy audit that we also conducted, we realized that the issue of sanitation was also one major cause of emissions. And as I speak to you now, when I assumed office somewhere last year, I came to meet heaps of refuse, mountains of refuse dotted in Accra. As a result of our pledge towards climate change, and also coupled with the fact that the president has also declared that he wants me to make Accra clean, I have evacuated about 85% to 90% of all the mountains of refuse in Accra. And we are gradually getting to the stage that we will not see mountains of refuse in Accra that produces all kinds of emissions in Accra. And also the informal sector, the inclusion of the informal sector. Accra, it's a cosmopolitan and it's urbanizing. The numbers are increasing day by day. And special planning, it's a challenge. So there are many informal settlements that are dotted in Accra. And how to include the informal sector in the general plan of developing Accra is very critical, because the informal settlements arrangement, it's also one major concern that, if not addressed, will be a major pollutant, in the urban space. So we're looking at the inclusion of the informal sector as well in the climate change issues that we are confronted with. And again, the city has a lot of moments, and for the past 15 years, the skyline of Accra has changed from 1 story to 15 story, 20 story, 30, 40 story. And it will interest you to note that most of the buildings are also not energy compliant. They are more European and American style, and that takes a lot of energy. So we as a city had conducted some fields assessment of some buildings, including our city hall, to ensure that we factor in climate compliance in the buildings that we put. In fact, as a city authority that approves of permit for buildings to come up, we are encouraging developers to be energy efficient compliant. And once you have a building that is energy efficient compliant, we fast track the process, and more importantly, reduce the cost of the issuance of building permits as a way of motivating developers also to. We have engaged the architects, surveyors, and all the partners in the development area for them to be conscious of the environment, because the kinds of buildings that are coming up in Accra are also not energy efficient. All these are designed to ensure, even as the country joins the international community on working on mitigation issues. I mean, the city of Accra does not lose sight of the fact that Rapid urbanization is going on. Coastal erosion, tidal wave incidents are happening. Air quality standards are being challenged with increasing cars and waste level. And so we have to build on more robust adaptation systems and be more resilient. I am leading decision making in these processes because the data is pointing in the direction of the changing trends. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you also very much for raising a couple of concepts that some of the speakers has already touched upon, especially when it comes about economic growth, economic opportunities, and which particular economic sectors in a society or in our economies will have to change and how. And thank you for those concrete examples. With that, I would like to turn to Helen and hear from her what 1.5 degrees could mean for the economy and where the economy broadly comes in here.
Thanks very much, Kalina, and thank you also to the Marshall Islands for organizing this fantastic virtual summit. It's a wonderful idea, as others have said, and it's a great honor to be part of this. So thank you. I really want to build on what some of the other speakers in this panel have said and emphasize where we have real development and economic benefits from enhancing action. I do think the 1.5C report sent a very strong signal that everyone must step up action and quickly. We need to aim for that temperature limit. And the good news is we actually have a lot of opportunities to do so in a way which can enhance the economy, can be better for people, better for jobs, and better for development. So I want to talk about that. But first, I do want to just come back to something which Marcel and Mayor Soa emphasized, which is around the adaptation element. As we heard from Daniela, even with 1.5C, we are locking in a certain trajectory of climate impacts, and we need to adapt and become more resilient to those. So even as we go towards reducing emissions and accelerating action on those, we need to ensure that we've got political momentum and interest around adaptation as well. And the new Global Commission on Adaptation that Marcel mentioned is a fantastic opportunity to really raise that political visibility and highlight some of the real actions and support that can take place to help ensure resilience and build adaptation. But let me get back to the question about reducing emissions and how we can do that in a way that delivers economic and development opportunities. And there's some very good news here, basically. We've released a report of the Global Commission on Economy and Climate, the latest report in September. We took stock of the latest developments and examples of what we're seeing around the world and did some new analysis on where these opportunities lie. And basically what we see is over the last few years, we've seen a real shift in the landscape around low carbon solutions. This includes dramatically falling costs for wind and solar power, well beyond what we expected to happen. It includes very rapid developments in the spread of electric vehicles and in energy storage and battery technologies, opening up new opportunities and developments in countries. And it also includes a growing awareness not only of the impacts of climate change, but also the incredible human costs of air pollution related to fossil fuel burning. And so this is something which we think has changed the situation significantly and put us now at a turning point where we can really accelerate action. So in the report, what we found is that if we actually step up and take bold climate action now, this could lead to a benefit, an economic benefit of $26 trillion for the globe between now and 2030. So it is no longer a question, as we've had before, can you have growth or do you want climate action? We need to have both, and we can have both together. $26 trillion in economic benefits. In addition to the direct economic benefits, we also identified a number of other benefits, including 65 million new low-carbon jobs in 2030 through this pathway. And to put that into perspective, that is equivalent to the current workforces of Egypt and the UK combined, their total workforces, and that's the new low-carbon jobs in 2030. We'd also prevent over 700,000 premature deaths from air pollution. We would be able to increase women's participation in the labor force. And through some subsidy reform, fossil fuel subsidy reform, and carbon pricing, we could generate as much as $2.8 trillion in government proceeds or revenues in 2030, which is equivalent to the GDP of India today. Now, those are revenues which governments, some of the often cash-strapped governments, could use to invest in social development, health, education, other priorities. Much needed. So there's some real economic and development benefits of stepping up action. And one of the things we noted there is that we're starting to see many countries, including a number of the CVF members, are already stepping up to seize these opportunities. And this includes the CVF countries having committed to 100% renewable energy by 2050. Costa Rica, Andrea was sharing some of the experiences there, announcing plans to become the first carbon neutral nation by 2021. And others are now following, including other CVF countries, but also Norway, Sweden, New Zealand, etc. Others are moving in that direction. A number of cities are taking action. And a new report that we have from the World Resources Institute highlights how CVF countries can really keep leading the charge in raising this ambition and do so in a way that actually delivers real development benefits for them at home. But CVF countries are not alone. Others are also inspired and are stepping up action. One example I wanted to share is in Indonesia, where we're working very closely with the government of Indonesia. They have declared that their next 5-year development plan, which they'll release next year, it's for 2020 to 2024, their next 5-year development plan will be the first ever low carbon development plan. And the Ministry of Planning is working closely with other ministries, with other stakeholders and partners to actually identify how to do this. What are the policy actions, the economic levers they can use to do so. And we just had a month ago the first results of the work with their own economic modeling system to actually look at how to do this and what benefits or costs it might bring to the economy. And the good news is it showed very clearly that the low carbon growth path, which is reducing some of the risks of natural resource overuse, would actually lead to much better economic growth than their current development plan, and better employment. So it's very strongly showing that this is the better path forward. We're also seeing great momentum in other markets, particularly where we see businesses and others. So for example, we have now almost 500 companies representing $7 trillion in market value that have signed up to science-based targets. And basically amongst them, they account for emissions collectively the size of Canada. So that is not small. We've got businesses stepping up. We also have investors and the finance community finally waking up to some of the risks of high carbon investments. So we have something like 400 investors with $32 trillion in assets under management that have committed to the investor agenda and taking action on climate change. And as the Mayor Soa highlighted with C40 and with cities, we're seeing incredible action. Over 8,000 cities and over 120 countries have stepped up and are committed to climate action. So there's incredible opportunities there. There's a lot of momentum we're seeing, which can help support countries to step up their own action or even nudge them to do so. But the moment is now. It is not enough, as we've outlined it. While it's exciting, while it's developing quickly, it is not yet enough to get us to the 1.5C. So we need not only political will and stepping up ambition there, but I think another point I'd like to highlight is we need politicians to actually take the handbrake off on action. In some cases, we have government policies that are not only not supportive of action, but they're actually slowing it down. And if I go back to that sort of a story analogy that Jennifer used, that our use of fossil fuels is like a patient being diagnosed with lung cancer and then deciding to continue smoking in any case, you can actually go a step further than that. And some governments, a number of governments in developed economies and developing economies are continuing to subsidize fossil fuel use to the tune of something like $373 billion each year. So not only are patients, all of us here on the planet continuing to smoke, but our governments at the moment are continuing to subsidize that. And that has to change, and urgently. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And thanks, because you're leaving us here with exactly that point. Things have to change and governments have to change. And I would like to know from the panel, concretely, what policies you think need to change now in order to make sure that 1.5 degrees are still possible? You already raised the fossil fuel subsidies issue. Then some of your speakers have raised the transport sector as being a crucial sector to cut emissions. Jennifer, you raised the whole issue of the coal, continued coal dependency, including in Europe and including in so-called climate champions such as Germany. So I would like to know from each of you where you see change needs to happen the most now, and also perhaps if you could outline some of the challenges of why you think that policies such as fossil fuel subsidies still exist and what stands in the way of removing them. So if I could start with Andrea, that would be excellent.
Oops, here we go. Thank you. Yeah, complex question. Let me see. I think that some of the previous speakers made some very good points around the engagement that we need to have, for example, with the financial community. And I think that's a very central area right now of the time of changes and challenges that we are facing. We have a lot of good policies sometimes, and we have to make coherence in our policies, do this alignment, and this is not an easy task sometimes. And I think this of the subsidies that we're giving to some fossil fuels, it's an example of that. We need to revise the whole legal and policy framework to see if it is coherent with this development, with these new development pathways, with this decarbonization. And we are doing this, for example, here in Costa Rica. One of the challenges that we're facing is that more than 22% of the income for our treasury comes from taxes on fossil fuels, for example, which is a good policy. But it's also a big challenge because if we succeed in this and in decarbonizing our economy, then our treasury will have a big hole. So it's the kind of discussions that we're seeing right now and that we must address. So right now, for example, after this, I'm going to another meeting with our regulator for the financial sector, and we are starting a big conversation with these financial entities and starting this dialogue. And I think it was Marcel who mentioned, we have different languages, and we need to start bridging these two languages, because right now there's some appetite, for example, from the financial sector. And they are saying, okay, we want to have clear goals. I think that's a first step from the governments. It's part of the things that we need to address. But then we need to have enabling environments. And one thing that we are seeing in our country is that sometimes we do have good ideas, but then to transform this idea into investment opportunities or investment cases, or it's not as simple as we see it. And in some of the big challenges areas, like in transport, we need big investments. And we will need to mobilize private funds, public funds, and to generate all this financial architecture, sometimes it's not as simple as it seems. And I think that probably we need to do this alignment first. I think that it's very important and it will take time. We need policy will then to implement the alignment of these policies. And sometimes it is not easy when you are given subsidies to some sector to take them off. That is, of course, will generate a lot of social confrontation, and it's not easy to deal with that. But we need to have a clear idea of the changes that we need to do. And then also start generating better investment plans. And I would just close my brief message right now. I think that we all need to do a lot of innovation in the way we're doing cooperation, for example. And I will say that some platforms, as the NDC platform, for example, is generating a very good space between developed and developing countries and the kind of needs and the new thinking that we need. And of course, these other coalitions that we are all part of are very good platforms to do this exchange of challenges and knowledge. And I think that's a very good point. And of course, I will also like to say that we are very supportive with Marshall Islands and the great leadership that they're having. Even now, they just presented their new NDC. And I think that's also a very strong political message that we all need to follow and to say that we're here and there to support each other.
Thank you very much. I would like to turn to the mayor now. I think, again, the microphone, I think we will have to switch on the microphone.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful discussion on issues of climate change and how to save our planet. Specifically in Ghana, one of the priority pillars of the Ghana's NDC's commitment highlights to address the issue of decarbonization of the grid. The policy is to target at least 12% renewable energy. You know, in this country, we have the wind and then we have the sun. So it's our disposal that we as a policy, we want to focus more on renewable energy. Previously, most of our energy was renewable, but now a lot of fossil fuel in generation. So there's a focus on us to push for a renewable energy in our country and our city. We believe that that's one sure way of reducing the emissions that we are confronted with. I have advocated that the climate change actions are local, and you should look at your local context and take the action. There may be global platforms. Once America is looking at the area of transportation and using electronic transportation. In Ghana, to be specific, it is very difficult to move on electronic transportation and change kinds of vehicles that we have within the next couple of years. But we have an opportunity to use renewable energy to reduce the impact of climate change that we have. Thank you. I'd like to leave you. I have another important appointment. God bless you.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mayor. And have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll leave you now.
Thank you.
Thanks for leaving us thoughts. And especially talking about decarbonization of the electricity grid, because already before Jennifer mentioned a major point, coal, but I would now like to turn to Jennifer and hear her thoughts about the larger question at hand.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll be quick so we can hear from others as well. I mean, I think, you know, your question about the policies, I mean, I think that there's quite a lot of experience on the policy side of things. I think we know that having feed-in tariffs or signals that are long, loud, and legal in the renewable energy sector are fundamental. We know that, I think we need more and more countries to be, in a way, setting goals to phase out the internal combustion engine and match that with 100% renewables goal, which can then be supported by those support mechanisms as long as they're needed. Although, you know, in places like the Netherlands, offshore wind is looking pretty good economically these days. So I think that has shifted, but really getting that mix on the transportation sector so that there is funding going into public transport systems as well as to, you know, moving into optimally renewably powered car sharing and bike sharing that occurs. And that is happening in a number of cities, which is pretty inspirational and pretty convenient, I think. And, you know, the area that often gets neglected, which I was really pleased to see in the IPCC report, is that of meat and dairy consumption and agriculture. I think that we need to get our arms around this, and there are various ways of doing that, whether it be through looking at food waste, which WRI has done a lot of work on, but also looking at how, you know, various policy mechanisms. We're doing quite a lot of work on that at Greenpeace to engage people in eating less and better meat and dairy. But my quick last thought is, I think, why do these fossil fuel subsidies still exist? Well, change, we're going through a change which we should have had more time for, and we've been talking about for a long time, but now we need to move quite quickly. And that means we need disruption. And those that have held the power and have benefited from the economic fossil fuel-based economy thus far are holding on tightly and are quite powerful in various systems, whether that be through electoral systems, whether it be through corruption, whether that be for just common practice. So that's where we need people to be engaging. And I guess my message would be to the people watching, please engage. Everything matters right now. Everything, whether it be what kind of electricity you buy, who you're talking to, your neighbor, talking to your mayor. We need to shift that power. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for that. We have 4 minutes left, so I'll turn to Marcel and Daniela for the last 2 comments. Daniela?
Thank you.
Marcel, please.
Shall I go first?
Yeah, please go.
Okay, well, quickly following up on what Jennifer just said, and I think someone once famously said, leaders are our elected followers, and so I would really like to underscore her last point, that everything matters, and that brings me to what I see happening in the Netherlands at the moment. Now, we are having an ambitious government, and a government that wants to raise the bar. Headline stories often are fueled by fear for the unknown, and questions dominating there is who is going to pick up the bill, and what is it going to mean for the fuel that I'm going to put in my car or that I need to use to heat my house. And to provide clarity on that one, I think is very good. But then politicians, and that's how democracy works, they do need public support. So taking up just the public during the transformation is critical. And for that, I think I also would like to compliment Costa Rica for being such a great inspiration. And I hope that during the Talanoa dialogue in Katowice, that stories like the ones from Costa Rica will inspire other politicians as well, that indeed you can do it without losing public support. In a way, you're transforming your society to a future that is actually something to really aspire. So let's leave some time for the other speakers. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Daniela, you have the last word.
Yeah, thank you very much for being part of this panel. I just want to remind you that the special report on 1.5 clearly states the future ahead of us, with all risks, opportunities, challenges, solutions, and joint leadership and governance, which is needed. So I think for no one, no politician or no single inhabitant, we can say we did not know what it will come. And we will live through 1.5 on our way to 2-degree warming, to 3-degree warming, to 4-degree warming. We have generations in each of these warming states unless we are acting now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that, and thanks for leaving us with this dark message, and also reminding us that all of us are a part of that whole, a part of the puzzle, each and every one of us. I think sometimes one does forget that individual actions matter too. And I think, thanks for raising this, especially since it is the CVF virtual forum, and I think the focus also on vulnerable nations and vulnerable people. So I thank you for this discussion. I think we've pretty much managed to stay within the time limit, and I thank all the speakers for responding to each other, and I hope that it was enjoyable for all, and I thank all the viewers. And I think with that, this is probably it. And I think most people would see each other in Katowice at the COP24 Climate Summit in a bit over a week.
All right.
All right.
Thank you for moderating.
Bye-bye.